Hey everybody, welcome to episode 6 of Cougar Dash, and this is the episode with hope. Cougar football is coming back. I'm excited. Ryan, I know you're excited.
Very
But
excited.
oh, absolutely. So yeah, I'm Cody Schoeler here with my co-host Ryan Root as always. But the big question that has kind of come from this is the college football playoff with the Pac-12 playing this season. They're coming back, but it looks different. Are they going to be able to make the college football playoff, Ryan? What do you think?
Is a Pac-12 team going to make the college football playoff? Well, that's not only, I think, the hardest accomplishment that a Pac-12 team can make. I'll give you a list of requirements that I'll have for a Pac-12 team to make the playoff. Okay, number one, they got to go undefeated, 7-0, no questions asked. Number two, they have to be ranked at the time of the season's start or perhaps receiving votes. Okay, so that cuts down the contenders about 2/3. Okay, next you got to win the conference, so that leaves one Pac-12 team, and just to add difficulty to it, you got to win every game by at least double digits. And then at that point, I think there's a chance because let's face it, I don't think Pac-12 stands a chance to get into the playoff, even if they meet all those requirements.
hmm First, I just kind of want to kind of poke at a few of those. So the whole undefeated thing, I think this year, yes, they have to go undefeated. But if you look at it, there hasn't been an undefeated Pac-12 champion in the 6 years of college football playoff. A Pac-12 champion has been able to get in with one loss, and I think that's more directly related to the success of the Big 12. If you look at in those 6 years, you have two Pac-12 champion teams that have made it, and 12 champion teams that have made it. They've all been Oklahoma. So that fourth spot has almost been directly tied to whoever wins that conference. So if the Big 12 struggles and has a two-loss team win it, I think that does open the door for a one-loss Pac-12 team to make it if whoever that team loses to is able to get revenge in that Pac-12 championship game. If they lose a crossover game and are able to come back and beat that team, I think the committee really looks at that. And another thing I want to look at is the they have to be ranked right now or receiving votes. The college football playoff ranking is not the AP poll. They wait a few weeks to do it. So we've seen teams like they rank teams once they've seen them on the field, not based on last season, not based on anything else. So I don't think a team has to be ranked right now in order to do it. I think that all they have to do is be in that first college football ranking, and we've seen teams that have been ranked kind of in random places and that make it. So I think that there's a lot that can be done. I think obviously we're in agreement here that the Pac-12 has to probably go undefeated. The first step is the Pac-12 to put a successful team on the field. Obviously they're not going to make it in if they beat each other up like usually. So I think we're in agreement on that, but I think the rest of the kind of the issues and the points is where we differ. And if you're watching right now in the chat, let us know what you think. This is a huge kind of contentious topic right now. A lot of people are talking about it, so let us know.
Well, Cody, it's not only can the Pac-12, compete with each other without banging each other up, it's also the strength of the schedule. Okay, we are not only facing each other in the conference, so whoever's going to play Oregon, if you beat Oregon, then yeah, your odds of making the playoff just skyrocketed. But USC was going to play Alabama. That without a game like that, then without a game outside of the Pac-12 for any Pac-12 team, I don't see how a Pac-12 team could even contend to be considered to go into that playoff. I mean, you have teams like UCF over down there in Florida, who throughout 2017 and 2018 almost went undefeated across two seasons until they lost to last year's national champion LSU. So a team that went practically undefeated for two straight seasons and lost to an outstanding SEC program. This is the thing that I strongly dislike about college football, and it's just the way that it is. But the moment you lose a game, they kick you right back down. But the moment Alabama loses a game, it's just one game. Well, the one game rule doesn't work for everybody. The moment that a Pac-12 team loses, you can kiss the college football playoff goodbye.
I think there's a high likelihood that happens, but I think I've heard a lot of people talk about this topic. almost every other Dash Sports, show since Thursday has touched on this, and I think a lot of people are focusing on the wrong thing. A lot of people were focusing on, oh, is 7 games enough? Can a Pac-12 team make enough of a statement in 7 games to make it in? But I think that the problem here isn't that, it's what happens around it. I wrote about this for Sports Pac-12. You can check out my column there, and check out all the other columns that the Dashboards hosts have written. But the Pac-12 is going to need help, and we've seen some of that help start just last week. Mississippi State beat LSU; they were a contender. Oklahoma lost. That puts them in a really tough spot. So I think if we're looking at this is going to be a weird year. We've seen upsets already. So if this is a trend and people are getting upset all across the board, that opens it up for a Pac-12 team to make it. If every single team loses once, then you can be a one-loss team that makes it in. I don't think we're going to see the perfect seasons that we usually do, because this year is just really messed up. So, some of the things I talked were, there's four playoff spots, and it just at how it plays out, how it has played out, really 3 of them are locked in, and I bet we can agree on this. You have Clemson, who is probably the most talented team. They're playing in the ACC that, other than themselves and the inclusion of Notre Dame this year, is pretty weak. So you can probably lock them in. Same with Ohio State. That team is incredibly talented, barely lost to Clemson last year to make it to the championship game, and is a little more competitive, but that Ohio State team is really good. So those teams are locked in, and then whoever wins the SEC. Every year, whoever wins the SEC has made it in. So those are locked in. And so really that 4th spot comes down to a Pac-12 champion, a Big 12 champion, or a one-loss SEC team. So you're really only competing against those 2 possibilities. So if a Big 12 champion can get ruled out, you're bringing it down to 50-50. And, if the SEC can start to beat each other up, if Mississippi off a few more upsets, if Auburn's able to, beat Alabama and lose somewhere else, then I think it's not going to be the case of, oh, can the Pac-12 beat out these other teams? I think it's going to be the case of these other teams kind of played themselves out of the spot, and a Pac-12 champion can emerge from this group and can take that last spot, because it has happened before.
Well, Cody, I'll rewind you a little bit there and just say shout out to Mike Leach, first of all, taking down the Tigers this Saturday. Shout out to him. Second of all, I want to go back to the playoff and how there's 4 teams in the playoff, which, speaking of Mike Leach, has openly said that 4 teams is way too little. There's 130 D1 programs for football in this country, and you're telling me that we're going to put 4 in a 2-round bracket to see who's the best school? I think the college football playoff definitely needs to be altered, and luckily it hasn't been around, for too long to be against changing its tradition or anything like that. But I say there should be 8 teams on the East, 8 teams on the West, the best of the best. I know that they can figure out those teams and who qualifies for what. Clemson would be in the East, WSU would be in the West. They have the Senior Bowl with a North and South team. They figured that all out. You can figure out East and West participants for an 8 team, 8 representatives for each, for the East and the West, meet in the middle. That's your national championship. Because I'm not sure how many more national championships that people can watch of Eastern teams: Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, debatably. When Oregon and Washington are the only Pac-12 teams in recent history to make the college football playoff, it's a little irritating, considering that the Pac-12 is full of competitive schools that, it always seems like there's different schools comparing for those 2 to 3 seeds. Oregon's been kind of on a roll, but Utah is emerged. Stanford is kind of on and off some of these years. USC is on and off. We have a ton of competition within our conference, but Clemson's clowning on the ACC and gets to be the first ranked school the majority of the time. So there's an inconsistency with how the conferences are weighted. I mean, the SEC's got a partnership with ESPN. How can the Pac-12 compete with that? How can the Pac-12 compete with a conference that's owned by a sports network that's owned by Disney? How can you even compete with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's correct. But a lot of times, people have that excuse of, oh, Clemson's beating up on the ACC, but Clemson has, they win national championships. They're not, getting embarrassed in that game like they don't belong. So Clemson definitely belongs. An SEC team. Oh, the one year Alabama got in as a non-SEC champion, I think they won the whole thing. So it's like these teams, like they are good. There's a reason why the SEC gets the attention that they get. It's because they produce really good football teams. And I think, the people like to blame that for why the Pac-12 doesn't get in. But if you look at it, the Pac-12 doesn't get in because the Pac-12 prevents itself from getting in. Like I mentioned, the two times that a Pac-12 champion has made it was when they were a one-loss conference champion. Every other year, the Pac-12 champion had at least two losses. So they're doing it to themselves. I know something that Pac-12 fans like to throw out there a lot is this circle of suck. It's when every team, you can make a circle of this team beat this team and this team beat that team and all the way around because everybody beats somebody. So like the first step is for the Pac-12 to just like, and I don't, obviously they're not going to just let somebody win, but if the Pac-12 keeps beating each other up, then we're not going to see a Pac-12 team in the college football playoff. They need a team to emerge and to run the table and to go undefeated, especially in this 7-game season. And then I think they will make it because, yeah, the Pac-12 doesn't get, the respect maybe that the SEC and them deserves, but we've seen that they will make it in if they're legitimately one of the top teams. In a normal year, if a Pac-12 team wins the conference with one loss, they're making it in a college football playoff. Like unless there's a bunch of undefeated teams, which usually doesn't happen. So this conference has gotten in its own way. So that's the first step, is that they have to get out of their own way in order for this to happen. And then there's some other steps that need to happen that we started to see, get the ball rolling on that. So I think if any year, we're looking at a Pac-12 team to make it this year so far looks like the best.
Well, Cody, I'll ask you this. Back in the Minshew days, we only had two losses, right? We went 11-2. If I'm correct on that record, went 11-2. If it wasn't for bad weather and one missed kick, we'd be 13-0, if you ask me. But we were one loss away from making your criteria that you mentioned. Do you honestly think that if WSU would have won that Apple Cup that year and gone on to play in the Rose Bowl and won that, do you think that they would have made a fourth seed? Because as much as we'd like to say that as Coug fans, what are they going to say about that? We had an amazing season, but if we were 12-1 or 13-0 or whatever it may be, do you really think we would have been that fourth seed?
13-0, absolutely. And if you look at that year was a little bit messy because I believe that was the year you had a 12-1 or 11-1 Notre Dame make it. So it kind of threw everything off balance with an independent team making it. And I think that was the year that Ohio State got left out as a conference champion. So if Notre Dame wasn't, an almost undefeated team that year, then I think you would have had a chance. So obviously that year was a little messed up. But I mean, in the 6 years that there has been a college football playoff champion, every time there's been a one-loss Pac-12 team, Pac-12 champion, they've made it into the playoff. So until I see it not happen, I'm going to think that it is just how it works.
I will just stand by saying that the college football playoff needs to change. And if they need to get into contact with the NFL to see their insight about it, because they're even adding a new team into their playoffs. So there needs to be some sort of board to figure this whole thing out, because 4 teams to decide the best out of 130 is just not cutting it.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. That's a conversation for another time and some higher up people, but a conversation that we are able to have that we will get to see play out is this Pac-12 season. Like I mentioned, the schedule has yet to be released. They said that we can expect it sometime this week. But what we do know is 5 of the games that WSU will be playing, because every Pac-12 team will play the teams in their own division as usual. So I want to ask you, Ryan, knowing what we know about the schedule, we know 5 games, we know who they're going to be against. Like, how do you see that playing out? How do you see WSU faring in these games against these opponents?
For the most part, Cody, I kind of like how this is looking. I mean, I'll cross one off the list now and say Oregon, home or away, probably not looking that great. Shout out to them. They're probably going to be the Pac-12 front runner to get to that playoff. Okay.
I actually think that isn't the case because up until last year they beat Oregon 4 out of 5 years. Like this team, for as bad as they sometimes are, as weird as they are, they play Oregon really tight. So getting them here in Pullman, I think that I don't want to say that they're for sure going to win, but I think that's a game that they actually have some possibility to win just based on the fact that they've played Oregon really, really well. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily put my money on it, but I think we
Right.
have a better chance than some people might think.
Well, it comes down to, and this is what inspires kind of my other answers for the other teams. But
Hmm.
we don't have the duck hunter Mike Leach anymore. Okay,
Sure.
he went down to go hunt some tigers this last weekend,
Hmm.
but we don't have the duck hunter with us anymore. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a different offense, different looking roster, and Oregon does not seem to have a hole on defense at all. And even when they lose Penny
Uh,
Sewell, it looks like that O line is still
hmm.
pretty nasty.
Yeah.
So that's as far as Oregon goes. But when I look at Cal and Stanford, OSU, and even UW,
Hmm.
things are looking pretty bright. I mean, we can at least agree on OSU. They're a mess. And they lost
Yeah.
their star receiver. They don't have their quarterback. They're a mess. Home or away, it'd be a cakewalk. Okay.
Yeah.
Cal, on the other hand, Cal kind of competes with us. And, I remember a couple years ago, last year for Luke Falk, that was an embarrassing game. However,
It was rough.
Rolo played them back in 16 and got blown out. And that's a completely different roster. And they even had a completely different coach. And now
Hmm.
Rolo gets to possibly get them at home and or play them in Cal. But Rolo, I think, will have his head around the system at this point
Hmm.
because not only has he competed with Cal in the past, but he competed with OSU as well. And he
Hmm.
beat them on their own turf, I believe. And like I said, home or away against OSU, that's pretty set up. Stanford is pretty inconsistent, and they're on the
Yeah.
decline as of late, and
Hmm.
the recruiting hasn't been going so well for them. I think that if we get a home game against Stanford, that might be nice. Away, that could be pretty competitive and pretty tight. And I will say, and I'll ask you, but UW, this year has given me a semi good feeling. Like, what do you think?
I think it gives out a good feeling in the sense of that Mike Leach probably was never going to win an Apple Cup, but Rolo, he's made comments that make it seem like he is really focusing on the game and he's honed in. So I think that does inspire some hope. And I just want to say first, if you're watching, drop your predictions for those 5 games. What do you think they're going to do? And so I agree with you, kind of on a lot of those, and I think one of the main points is going to be the scheduling. When do we get these teams? If they get Oregon week 1, I think that's a loss because that defense is going to be good. And if you're throwing a quarterback, against Oregon week 1, that's going to be hard. If they get Oregon later in the season with some time to figure stuff out, then I think that helps them out. So the scheduling is going to be a huge factor, especially with new quarterback and a new coach. But as far as the other teams go, Cal, I'm going to assume, and I think most people are doing this, that the division games are going to be where they were supposed to happen this year, because they always play these teams. So if that's the case, WC would get Cal at home, which they've played bad against Cal in the past, but those have all been on the road. They've beat Cal at home the last 2 times. So if they are able to get Cal at home, then that's a feisty team. They play well, but they've played Cal good at home. And then Oregon State. I think that's last year was close. That was a tough game, but that team is just I don't know who looks at that team and goes, oh no, we have to play Oregon State. Uh, the hosts at Beaver Dash are a little disillusioned. They're calling for 4-3, 5-2s. I don't know if they've watched an Oregon State football game. I would them. If they didn't, I can't say that's very entertaining. And they just said, oh, WCU's a win pretty easily. Well, it hasn't been a win since 2013, so I
Yeah.
really don't see that changing. I think Oregon State's going to be a win for us, especially if they're able to get their offense and their scheme figured out pretty early. Stanford, like you said, they've been inconsistent. They're definitely dealing with some stuff. WCU hasn't lost to them since 2015, So, those are some games that are looking up. So, I have optimism. I think we both do. So I look at this and I'm not scared. Oregon and UW and then Cal could be some tough games, but I don't see I don't see them getting less than two in a bad season. So I think they have a decent shot. Like, I don't think that this is going to be a team that is in the Pac-12 gutter.
No, and again with UW, Rolo played them last year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he played
Absolutely.
them in Seattle, and they got blown out by the Huskies. Okay, Rolo has known from day one since his
Mm-hmm.
introductory press conference. A fan asked him, what about this Apple Cup, Rolo? What are we going to do about this? And I don't have the number off the top of my head, but he said the amount of days that were
Oh yeah,
remaining until
he's
the next
counting down.
Apple Cup. He's
He's ready.
counting down. He said last week that he has a counter on his phone that is keeping
Mm-hmm.
track for him. Okay, he's this beating UW is not only a part of the job description for the new WSU head coach, because as great as Mike Leach was in a lot of different departments, he just couldn't get it done against those Westerners.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it was along the top of the list of the job description of,
Absolutely.
we'd love you to pass the ball. We'd love you to incorporate Borgie. We think you got a good, personality over there in Hawaii, but we want the Apple Cup. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think Rolo not only understands that, and he has been an incredible role model for WSU fans without even coaching a game yet, which again, I think is still pretty incredible for such a small
Mm-hmm.
community to revolve around a coach like this. He not only understands the job description, but this is personal for him, I think.
Absolutely.
I think this is a vengeance story waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the end of this season, if the Apple Cup is scheduled to where it's supposed to be, and it is supposed to be in Pullman if we do stick with that schedule.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got our butts kicked in Seattle last year, but now we're
Mm-hmm.
back in Pullman. There's no fans to distract either team,
Mm-hmm.
and we're on our home turf with
Yeah.
Rolo's mindset and his personality. And depending on how that first bit of the season goes, which, like I said, I think is a pretty good, is got a pretty good outlook. I have a pretty good feeling about this.
Yeah, I agree. I think if he knows that if he can do that, then his legacy is
He'll
cemented
get an
here.
extension right away if he
Oh,
wins.
for sure. And so, looking to these games, going to take a bit of a negative approach here, but what do you think WC's biggest weakness is heading into the season? Now that the season's actually happening, we can stop looking at these as hypotheticals. They're going to be on the field, and where do you think they're going to need some work?
Well, I'm sure you predicted it. We're going to go to the defensive side of the ball. And if we could further specify where we're talking about here, I'm looking at the D line.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the D line isn't great. It's not terrible. Isn't great. Luckily, the coaches from Wyoming coming in had, I believe, the 10th ranked rushing defense in the nation
Yeah, they
last
had a
year.
great defense.
So that gives me some hope for this D line, but I know right out the gate it's not looking good. Look, we had about a little over 20 sacks last season collectively. Mm-hmm. Almost half of those came from players who came from linebackers, players in the secondary, or players who left. Okay, and as much as I think Will Rogers III is going to be a vital veteran for this D line, and I think Ron Stone Jr. is going to have an improved season as well. Probably have some more reps out there. It's just not enough to pace this defense in the right way. I mean, the secondary has its issues of its own, but this D line, we're going to need some big stops on third down and fourth down against some of these teams, and they're going to struggle right out the gate. I hope they prove me wrong, but they're not off to a great start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've definitely been missing the days of Hercules Mataafa and Frankie
Those
Luvu
were the days.
Just wreaking havoc. And I'm going to take a bit of a unique approach here, and I'm going to say that they're big inexperience, just kind of all across the board. Obviously, just inexperience in the system. This is a terrible year to have a new coach and to have a new quarterback. It's no fault of their own, but it's just a tough year to try to implement that new system. Whoever ends up getting the starting job, they're getting thrown into the fire with a shortened off season and a weird season. And I think no fans is really going to impact a guy who hasn't really played before. It could help, but I think it's gonna be weird. It's gonna be awkward. Another thing, they lost 10 starters. Just looking at that roster, and receiver was really hit hard. They're only returning 216 receptions out of 439 last year. That's a little under half, and 86 of those came from Max Borghi, the running back. So after Max Borghi, a lot of those guys who were racking up receptions are gone. And outside receiver was hit really hard. Only Calvin Jackson Jr. is returning. We've seen Desmond Patman, Easop Winston graduate, Tay Martin transfer. So and then you look at the defense. Like you mentioned, some guys on the D line that have left. The secondary has been hit pretty hard by guys not returning. So it's just, in a normal year, I think this is something they could fight through, and they could figure it out with spring ball and season. But and then we'd be focusing a lot more on the D line. But in this season where it's really weird and it's shortened, and Rolo hasn't been able to coach a practice on the field yet, and it's almost October, I think the inexperience is going to be the biggest hurdle for this team to succeed this year.
Well, bringing it back to the D line a little bit, it doesn't only come down to inexperience, which I do think that that's going to be an obstacle for WSU to overcome, not
Hmm.
only in the receiver department, D line, but I mean probably in the cornerback department as well. We don't,
For sure.
we don't have that transfer savior. It seems like
Hmm.
this year we might have to get a younger guy back there, but with the D line, it reminds me a lot of our NFL team in the state, Seahawks. Okay,
Hmm.
let's look at their pass rush, which is atrocious. Okay, and
Agreed.
they still end up winning games, which shout out to them. But
Hmm.
they're resorting to all pro safety Jamal Adams to support this pass rush. Okay, they're losing pass coverage to try to help out with this pass rush. Now, granted, Jamal Adams is a spectacular prototype safety, but
Hmm.
the point being is, do you want Skylar Thomas doing that? Do you want some true freshman safety that may or may not play to come and do that? It just doesn't make sense, especially in the Pac-12 where I brought it up earlier with Oregon's O line. We're not getting past that O line consistently. Like
Hmm.
the Seahawks played the Cowboys yesterday. Okay, they're not getting past one of the best D lines in football consistently, even on a banged up O line in Oregon or Dallas, or in Oregon O line without Penny Sewell is still dangerous, and
Very
their
good. Yeah.
running back system is extremely dangerous. This Wyoming defensive coaching staff that is coming in has some big, a big obstacle to overcome.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think if we're going back to my point of inexperience, where does this team have the most experience? And I think that'd be the linebacking group, with Jahad Woods, with Justice Rogers. So I think if there's any group that is going to be able to help that D line, it'll be the linebackers. And to rely on Jahad Woods, obviously the leader of that defense, and a lot of bodies with that experience. I think that is the only, that's really going to be the saving grace of this defense, if guys are going to be able to help out, if Skylar Thomas in the nickel can help out in the run game, if those linebackers can fill the holes and can do that. So I think I agree that if we're going by position group, I think that D line needs a lot of help. But I just think inexperience is going to be a bigger issue just across this whole team, on the D line as well, but just everywhere. And I think bringing it back to, I mean, a first year quarterback, this is not the year that I would want a first year quarterback to be in. And if we're looking back, you might say we've had a first year quarterback before, but Anthony Gordon was here in that offense for 4 years. Minshew had started before, so this isn't going to be the same type of first year quarterback. This is a guy taking his first collegiate snaps ever in his lifetime. And so it could be a rough year if that inexperience shows on the field. Hopefully it doesn't. As we said, we've got some good shots against some of these teams. So if they can get over the inexperience, if they can get past issues on the D line, then I think we'll have a fun, exciting Cougar football season coming up. That's all we have for this week. You can find our written content exclusively at sportspac12.com. Like I mentioned, my college football playoff roadmap column. Take a look at that. Also follow them at Sports Pac-12 on Twitter. You can find links to that written content on our website, dashboards.tv, and make sure to follow us at dashboards.tv on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Dashboards, where you can find all of our shows and our clipped out segments. And please subscribe to that and give us a follow.